paper Social Movement and Politics in India, and we'll start with the first unit today. So your first unit, the first one, has a couple of things that will give you an idea about what we are going to try to learn in this paper. So the first unit itself will try to help you understand what is the meaning of social movements, then the nature of the social movements, and then different types of social movements, how the social movements have been organized, and why we need to study and understand social movements. And also later on we'll understand the various approaches to study and understand social movements, the relevance and the methods of studying social movements. So basically this first unit I'll be trying to complete it within today and one another day, so that will take you 4 classes. So we'll have try to have 2 classes today, and through which we'll start with the first unit. So I'm not sure whether in graduation you have gone through the paper or the idea of social movement. Social movement basically is also one of a kind which is much more associated to sociology rather than to political science. But then certain social movements and to be very broad, most of the social movements have got very later on towards the the whole tenure of the social movement tries to have a political character as well. I'll be both bilingual in this class, so whenever you feel any difficulty or you're not understanding everything, so just feel free to drop a message in the chat box so that I can repeat it once again. So ami aji start koribo loiso first unit to tomalkor paper Social Movement and Politics in India paper khonar first unit to jot ami start korim social movement or meaning ki definitions kisman ami discuss korim, aru plus tomar social movements bahut bibhinno type of social movements thakibo pare. So আমি ডিসকাস কৰিম সেই বেলেগ social movements খিনি কেনেকুৱা, হিহঁতৰ কোনটো বেচিছত হিহঁতৰ ডিফাৰেন্সিয়েট কৰিব পৰা যায়, then various approaches কেনেকে আমি social movements খিনি বেলেগ তোমাৰ perception বা বেলেগ তোমাৰ dimensionত চাব পাৰি, বুজিব পাৰি, and there are some methods to study social movements. So আমি সেই methods বোৰ ওপৰতো focus কৰিম. আৰু next thing that we will study is ইয়াত যিটো বস্তু নাই ধৰি লোৱা, and then we need to study that is you have various theories which are associated with social movement. So beleg theory ase jitu social movement or logot associated hoy, which will help us to understand better. So we'll try to have an overview of those theories as well. Now let's start with the concept of social movement. So the term social movement or jitu term hoy, the term social movement, it was first introduced in 1850. 1850 first introduced kora hoisile the term social movement by German sociologist Lawrence von Stein. Lawrence von Stein এই sociologist jone first use korisile এই term to 1850, the term social movement. Aru teo use korisile in the book, he used it in the book History of the French Social Movement from 1789 to the present. The history of the French social movement from 1789 to the present. 1850 এই কিতাপখন তেওঁ লিখি পাব্লিছ কৰিছিলে লৰেন্স বনষ্টিন আৰু তেওঁ he was the first one to use the term social movement. Now মই প্ৰথমতে কৈছো যে social movement is like associated with associated with sociology much more than political science, but one thing which is common, eta bostu jitu common hoy, that is the social movement is always a collective behavior, but collective eta movement hoy jot okol ejon manhu, there is no one such person who can lead the movement. Ejon manhu kitio a social movement to lead koribo nware, so it has always to be a collective behavior. And the second thing is that a social movement to hodai aim kore society khonok change koribole. It is always related to change. Hodai eta change of loi pelai mane gote social movement to heri hoy, eto ki koy related hoy. So basically now we'll go through some of the definitions which will make you understand better. So some of the important definitions of social movements are, first and foremost, the definition that we are going to discuss is by Herbert Blumer. Herbert Blumer or judo social movements or definition. So social movements can be viewed as collective enterprises to establish a new order of life. Collective enterprise to establish a new order of life. Tarmane social movement eta collective enterprise hoy. Eta collective mane sobe mili pelai eta dhorwa enterprise ba eta effort eta, and its aim is to establish a new order of life. And this social movement aims to establish a new order of life. They have their inception in the condition of unrest and derive their motive power on condition of unrest and derive their motive power on one hand from dissatisfaction with the current form of life. Tahator jitu motive hoy, the people who are associated with the movement, he movement to social movement to logot jikhini manu associated hoy, tahator motive ki thake, tahati a movement to agborhai loi jabole, to take forward, to carry forward this movement, they need some motive, right? He motive to etu hoy je jitu tahator present life, the present life which they are living, they are deprived of something in their present life. Suppose tomar etia dhorlo jitu condition hoy as a society, somebody is not happy with some changes, hetu karone hihoti eta movement eta start kore so that they can fight and bring the change they want. Kisman manhe bahut bostu deprive kori thake, mane kisman bostu napai, so he bostu khini pabo karone there has to be a movement, there has to be a collective effort. So social movement at our main objective hetue hoy je because of some deprivation, some people come and form a movement and carry forward the movement, and they hope for a new system of living. Okay, Herbert Blumer koise je first and foremost a definition to what you need to know, a definition to kisman bostu tomaloke point out koribole hika jibur dhorlo jeneke ami hei guti social movement idea to buji pabo paru. First and foremost, social movement can be viewed as a collective enterprise. The first point definition to bhitor etu ase je social movement is always a collective enterprise. Secondly, they have the motive of the people who are associated is always because of a deprivation of something in the present life. Guti social movement logot associated jibu manu thake, tahator jitu motive ba tahator jitu aim ba objective, hetu hol je tahati kiba ta deprive korise, they are being deprived of something, and what they expect, tahati এই social movement to কিয় মানে যেটো কাৰণে কৰিছে তাপা কিবা এটা expectation কৰে so he expectation to hold that they want a new system of living there should be a new system of living so Herbert Blumer definition kitar bitorat ei tinta main tumar important elements now the next definition that we are going to discuss is MSA Rao so MSA Rao basically basically says that a social movement essentially involves collective mobilization same kotha koy thik ase almost same kotha koy but then there is a difference is that it says that it is a sustained collective mobilization mane hol je tumar bahut dinor pra social movement to soli ahi ase aru he collective effort to pra bahut manok ako mobilize kora hoise in order to join the social movement so that is basically collective mobilization through either informal or formal organization through এই যে mobilization to করা হইছে মানুহক ধৰিলৱা aware কৰা হইছে movement to বিষয়ে এই mobilization to কেনেকে কৰা হইছে through formal or informal organizations কিছুমান ধৰিলৱা মানে informally হিহতি meeting পাতি পেলাই aware কৰিছে কিছুমান ধৰিলৱা formal তাহাতৰ নিজৰ office আছে বা নিজৰ society আছে through that they are like making the people aware so basically a social movement is essentially it involves sustained collective mobilization through either formal or informal organization and is generally oriented towards bringing about change either in partial or in total aru basically etu koise ki he jitu dhorlo movement hoy he movement tries to bring out the change any kind of social movement will try to bring out the change okay so he change to partial hobo pare ba total change eta hobo pare partial as in like mane jitu dhorlo social order ase he social order to ধৰিলোৱা অলপ কেইটামান বস্তু চেঞ্জ কৰিব পাৰে বা হে গুটেই social order to the total social order can be changed okay so MSA Rao he says that a social movement is essentially an involvement of sustained collective mobilization through either formal or informal organization and is generally oriented towards bringing about change either partial or total okay so next move on to the next definition that is by TK Omen so TK Omen says he defines social movement as a conscious effort on the part of a group to mitigate their deprivation and secure justice okay so TK Omen ite kihor pot focus korise he focuses on that it is a conscious effort on the part of a group eta group e hetu bahut sai sinti using their own consciousness like they are very careful okay so using its consciousness it is an effort of a group to mitigate their deprivation and secure justice tahati life ot jikhini bostu poa nai they are deprived of something so to ensure that hey deprivation to tahator life ot na thake to ensure that deprivation goes away and to secure justice okay it is also a movement conditioned by the factors in the social structure a social structure to society jihetu eta social movement jete start hoy they involve some social structure suppose etia ahomot jodi social movement kiba ta start hoy it will involve the society of Assam he ahomor society khonot jitu structure ase amar jitu jenekwa dhoroner eta structure on society khon build up hoise so the social movement will try to involve that structure as well then it basically tries to have an ideology a social movement to mane jeneke thorilo tuma arambho hobo and it will continue that will be based on some sort of ideology and it will try to redress the evils or grievances of the people. Aru a gote social movement to which will be based on like ideology, it will try to work on redressing মানে যিবোৰ ধৰি লোৱা তোমাৰ আমাৰ grievances থাকে বা যিটো society ধৰি লোৱা কিবা evil কাম চলি আছে, illegal কাম চলি আছে, so সেইবোৰ তোমাৰ মানে mistakes বোৰক address কৰিবলৈ চেষ্টা কৰিব. So every definition till now, like you have heard, tries to give an element to some features of the social movement. Prothomto janage collective enterprise asile, change asile, then you have ideology right now, then you have certain motives janage structure to mane involve kore. So every person, like every social scientist, tries to understand social movement from their own perception. Aru hei jetia guti social scientist pura eta definition die, then we understand like the phenomena of the social movement. The social movement to actually hoy ki, social movement to nature kenekwa hoy, social movement to dhorila form keneke hoy, social movement to dhorila form hoa pisot jetia in progress thake, what will be the consequences of it. So there are certain things that we can figure out from the definitions itself. Now enekwa aru bahut definition tumaloke bahut kitabot paba, so like these were some of it. Then we next come up to the features of the social movement. So next part that will focus is features of the characteristics or features of the social movement. So social movement involves the first feature. Social movements involve collective action by the people. Junto bahut basic first tapra ami mane huni aso definitions to ami etu gom palu that social movements is not an individual action, it is a collective action by the people. Bahut kijon manhue gut khai pelai eta action jito collective action hoy, that can be termed as social movements. Social movements cannot be one individual action. Okay, but not yate aru eta small, there is a small clarification, small justification, but not all form of collective action can be labeled as social movements. Not all. Sob collective actions okay ami social movements kobo nuaru. We cannot call all collective actions as social movements. Now let me give you an example to make this point clear. So suppose like তোমালোকে এনেকুৱা ধৰি লোৱা বহুত কেसेছ ধৰি লোৱা পাব পাৰা যে sometimes when you are traveling by a busত travel কৰি আছা কোনবা এটা জেগালে, and then like there is a fight between like the passenger and the conductor, okay, regarding like something either like payment or karne ba kiba ta hol aru, and then there is a fight between like the conductor and the passenger. Now like hey fight to maybe there will be the other people who will be involved, kunba dhorla aru passenger khiniu involve hobo pare ba hetu time mote dhorla beleg busor conductor driver buru hey conductor to pine involve hoi pele, that might lead a huge number of people. Hetu to eta collective action hoy, right? Ami ki koisilu je social movement is a basic collective action by the people. Now a fight to the fight between the conductor and the fight between the passengers, that might also be a collective action, but we cannot see them as a collective action. Ami jano he fight to ami social movement boli declare koribo paru nuaru, right? So that is a different thing. So that is why not all collective action can be termed as a social movement. Now why we cannot term all collective actions as social movement? Because to fight hoisile, the fight between the conductor and the passenger, which involved a lot of people, did not target into any kind of social change. Society kiba ta change he fight to ona nasile. That is why we cannot see as this collective action as a social movement. Instead ami jitu hold the car movement, okay, So the calm movement, it also involved a lot of people, and through that, like, there were some changes which could be made. So that one we can term as a social movement, right? So hey teneke ami sabo lagibo that whether the social movements, they have to have the collective actions, as well as they have to target some social changes. কিবা এটা society change এটা আনিব লাগিব. Okay, so then only we can term it as a social movement. So that is one of the basic feature of the social movement. Next whole, that social movement should be sustained and not sporadic in nature. So social movement should be sustained. Mane tumi dhori loa aji social movement kiba eta effort eta arambho hol and kailele naikia hoi gol. So that doesn't call it a social movement. Social movement have to go through a whole long period of time, long boli nohoy, through a period of time, where we can see how many people are involved, kiba change anise ne nai, কিমান মানুহ ইনভলভ হৈছে, সেই মানুহখিনিয়ে কেনেকে চেঞ্জ আনিছে, সেই মানুহখিনিয়ে ইমানখিনি এফৰ্ট ধৰি লোৱা, ইমানখিনি আগবঢ়াৰ পিছত কেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ এটা চেঞ্জ আহিলে, চেঞ্জ একেবাৰে আহিলে নে নাই. So to make that assessment, that has to be a period of time. That is why social movement should be sustained through a period of time and not sporadic. Sporadic মানে হল যে যিবোৰ ধৰি লোৱা য'তে ত'তে, আজি ধৰি লোৱা অসমত কিবা এটা ধৰি লোৱা, তিনচুকীয়াত কিবা এটা ধৰি লোৱা এটা মুভমেণ্ট এখন ৰেলী এখন হৈছে, এণ্ড আছে গোটেই অসমত একো নাইকিয়া, এণ্ড দেন চেম ইছ্যু এটা লৈ পেলাই ধৰি লোৱা গুজৰাটৰ কোনোবা এটা সৰু জেগাত কিবা এটা ৰেলী এটা হৈছে, দেন তেনেকে হলে নহব. The social movement needs to happen at like a lot of places at regular intervals with like a proper like agenda. তাহাঁতৰ কিবা এটা ইস্যু, এনেকুৱা এটা ইস্যু হব লাগিব যিটো ধৰি লওক গোটেইখিনি মানুহে তাহাঁতক ছাপোৰ্ট কৰিছে, তাহাঁতক আগবাঢ়ি লৈ যাবলৈ তাহাঁতৰ লগত মানে এগ্ৰী কৰিছে. So social movements need to have a sustained and it should not be sporadic in nature. So this is the second feature. Then the third one is social movement differs from a crowd by being a long-term collectivity and not a quick spontaneous grouping. Okay, so that means that এটা ধৰি লোৱা যেনেকে এখন বিহু সন্মিলনত, okay, in a bihu function, like a lot of singer comes, people like gathered, they form a crowd which is very spontaneous in nature. Ahile singer khatam hol, gan san khatam hol, people go back home. So that cannot also be called as a social movement. Okay, it has to be a long-term collectivity, okay, and it has to be a sustained one, মানে একদম spontaneous নহয়. ধৰি লোৱা বহুত দিনৰ আগৰ পৰা ধৰি লোৱা কিবা এটা প্লান কৰিছে, সেইদিনাখন হ'ব, আকৌ with planning the next day happens. It has to be a long-term collectivity. Now, how social movements are basically different from other movements. এতিয়া তোমালোকে আগতে ধৰি লোৱা শুনিছা something as like in the Indian freedom struggle you would have heard like the non-cooperative movement, then there were various like trade union movements in history. So hey, trade union movements বা hey like cooperation movements or এইবোৰ যে যিবোৰ ধৰি লওক সৰু সৰু cooperatives থাকে, these people have like movements. So henekwa movements বোৰ and social movements, how can they be differentiated? All the other movements and the social movements, how that can be differentiated. So basically like we have seen such movements like trade union movements and etc. in the like history. So they attempt to change the social relations and try to promote change. Jito almost same hoy, which is very similar to the social movements, that they attempt to change the existing social relations and try to promote change. Agot jikhini existing social relations asile, thik ase, in the society, aru ধৰি লোৱা সেই social relations খিনি maintain কৰিবনে তাতে কিবা change আনিব. So the movements have always tried to focus on that. এইটো almost একই হয়. This point is very similar to social movements that it once changed. However, there is this one feature, one characteristics which actually excludes social movements and those trade union movements or cooperative movements. That is the trade unions and cooperatives or any other organizations which come up with the movements, they function under a given set of rules. যেনেকে for example trade union movement. Trade union movement এটা যেতিয়া আৰম্ভ হয়, when it starts, a trade union movement when it starts, তেতিয়া কি হয়, the workers and the authority, right? সেই workers বোৰৰ আন্ডাৰতো এটা hierarchy থাকিব. Firstly, কিছুমান ধৰি লওক তাহাঁতৰ leaders থাকিব, তাৰপিছত ধৰি লওক higher salaried workers থাকিব, lower salaried workers থাকিব, একদম তলত ধৰি লওক low level, low wages workers থাকিব. So তাহাঁতি গোটেইখিনিয়ে ধৰি লওক ফাইটত নাযায়. They don't come up as a movement. They don't go and like attack the administration. কি হয়, যিখিনি অথৰিটিক ধৰি লোৱা কম্পিট কৰে বা অথৰিটিৰ লগত কথা পাতে, কোনে কথা পাতে, the trade union leaders, right? Their associations. তাহাঁতিহে ধৰি লোৱা negotiation কৰিবলৈ যায়. So it does not attract the whole population as a whole. Plus trade union movements or cooperative movements of তাহাঁতৰ ভিতৰত এটা organizational structure থাকে because they are an institution. Any kind of institution will have an hierarchy. Hey, hierarchy mote eta organization hoy. So what happens in those kind of movements, what happens is that because of this organization, whole lot of population is not involved. Common মানুহ that involved নহয়. আজি ধৰিলা এটা company এটাই কিবা এটা strike কৰিছে, common মানুহ is not like, the common people is not involved. The people who are working in that company will only be involved. So কি হয়, social movement and those movements are differentiated, can be differentiated in certain ways. First and foremost, social movements does not have an organization as rigid as the trade union movements, or trade unioner nisnake social movements were iman rigid organization নহয়. They are very flexible. Suppose এটা কা আন্দোলনত you could see like old, the senior people getting involved, associations getting involved, NGOs getting involved, students getting involved, everyone is getting involved because it is based on a shared or a common belief, common understanding. Kintu trade union movement eta, do you see like common people getting involved? No, right? So that is why this like social movements and these trade union movements or the other political movements have got certain differences. The first one is the organization, যিটো বহুত ধৰি লোৱা flexible হয় when we talk about the social movements. Hierarchy, যিটো ধৰি লোৱা trade union movements ৰ যেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ এটা hierarchy আছে, the workers মানে ধৰি লোৱা যিটো ধৰি লোৱা trade union হয়, unionৰ leader, তাৰপিছতে ধৰি লোৱা executive leaders, then the workers, এনেকে যিমানখিনি তুমি hierarchy পাবা, those are not available or those are not there in the social movements. Then you have basically like members. Social movement or the membership is open to all. Kintu trade union movements or cooperative movements, the membership is very limited. The people who are actually working or associated with those trade unions are the only one who participate in that movement. Kintu social movement or bahut beleg. Social movements are those like where the membership is open to all. Okay, so enekwa kisuman differences or karone we can like we can distinguish between the social movements and the other like movements. So next like feature is that social movement not only promote change but it also resist changes. Now ধৰি লোৱা social movement আমি কৈছিলো আগতে that it is associated, its main motive, তাহাঁতৰ main objective টো এইটো হয় কি তাহাঁতি ধৰি লোৱা কিবা এটা change আনিব বিচাৰে. The main motive, I mean the main objective of the social movement is that they want to bring change. Now there can be one other factor to it or one other side to it, that social movements not only promotes changes, but it also can resist changes. অকল তোমাৰ change আনিব নিবিচাৰে, কেতিয়াবা change টোক resist টো কৰিব লাগে। মানে social movement sometimes aims to resist the changes. ধৰি লওক কিবা এটা law এখন, যেনেকে তোমাৰ এতিয়া farmers laws. Okay, so farmers laws was not supposed to bring any changes, new changes, but it was all about resisting the change. যিখিনি নতুন change আহিছিলে, সেই change টোক resist কৰিবলে তোমাৰ গোটেই movement টো, farmers movement টো আহিছিলে. So that is why social movement not only promote change, but it can also be about resisting the changes. তেনেকে তোমাৰ social movement also sometimes brings about reforms in the social structure. যেনেকে তোমাৰ ব্ৰিটিছৰ টাইমত যদি তুমি চোৱা, then Raja Ram Mohan Roy and like his idea of reformation, প্ৰথম sati, widow remarriages, so সেইবোৰ কি আছিলে? Those were kind of reforms in the social structure of Indian society. So social movement sometimes can also be reformative in nature. কেতিয়াবা কিছুমান reforms আনিবৰ কাৰণেও social movements থাকে. Okay? So the last feature is social movements refer to a collective action or behavior to achieve better conditions in the society. So jitu dhorila tomar collective action hoy ba collective effort hoy, it is always aimed to achieve better conditions in the society. It is aimed to achieve like better conditions. Jitu dhorilo agote condition asle society tatke bhal hobo karone, but it has to be a better society. Hey bostu karone, that aiming that a social movement basically starts. They can also be defined as a voluntary association of people engaged in a consolidated effort to change behavior and social relationships in the larger society. So social movements can also be defined as a voluntary association of people. Okay, so remember this like phrase, voluntary association of people. Social movement কোনো মানুহক তোমাৰ obligated কৰি দিয়া নাযায় কি তুমি এটো কাম কৰিবই লাগিব. Nobody is forced upon. It is always voluntary. কিন্তু ধৰিলে trade unionত কি হয়, if you are associated with the union, তুমি বিচৰা তুমি নিবিচৰা, you have to be associated with the entire movement. But in social movement, as I said, it's very flexible, and it is also a voluntary association of people where people joins the movement out of their own will. Nobody forces anybody to join the movement, but people join the movement out of their own will. So this is what makes it also very different, the voluntary association of people. Okay, so these are certain kind of like features of social movements. I hope etaleke ekhini buji paisa, the definition and the basic like characteristics of social movements. So if you have any questions till now, or if you're not understanding something, you can just ask me, so that like if everything is clear, we can move on to the next part. Yeah.
Hello. I have a question, madam.
Yeah, say.
My question is that what are the difference between social movement and new social movement?
Social movements and
New social movement.
What social movements, and I'm still not getting it. And new social movements.
Yeah.
Okay, so see, there is no such. I don't think so. Like we can call like a social movement as a new social movement until and unless we have certain methods. As far like the literature that is there, the new social movements, the difference between the old and the new social movement is that regarding the use of the methods. Because earlier like social movements were all like for example like agote ki asle that people would like come together, they will have meetings, their methods are like going to houses and then making people aware of their issue, and then people coming up to join the movement. But now with the help of technology, sitting at home, like you have a different method of making people aware. And like, you have all those like pressure groups. Ajikali dhorila civil society organizations ase. Then you have like various, lobbying groups. So all those also affect like the whole like nature of social movements. Agote dhorila social movements we would say was much more narrow in the sense like that social movement eta dangor hobo karone it would have taken a long time janeke tomar Indian national like the struggle, it took a long time to encompass the entire people. But right now like janeke ami farmers movement ote dekhilu ba ka movement ote dekhilu, people were very rapidly and rapidly like joining the entire issue because of like technology. So in that sense like we could say that jitu dhorila nature hoy, based on the nature and based on the methods of mobilizing people, one can probably say that like make a difference between the old social movements and the new social movements. Anything else? Okay, so let's go on to the next part then, which is the nature of the social movement. So etyalage jitu dhorila social movement jitu term hoy, the term social movement, it is being used by various scholars and like it is being used to understand various issues and for example like all the nationalist struggles, hawk tumar the Dalit movements, peasant movements, farmers movements, feminist movements. So any kind of like those kind of movements which aim to have a change in the social structure or social change. So hey teneke tomar guti idea of the social movement have been used and understood by various scholars differently. Okay, now like there is something jitu ami he organization or kotha patisilu in one of the features. Now a social movement, okay, he nature to buji pabo, the nature of the social movement to buji pabo karone we need to understand certain like other elements associated with the social movement. Okay, so social movement or nature to kenekwa dharon to buji pabo karone dhorila beleg jigita social movement or kebata or beleg elements we need to understand that. So a social movement must demonstrate a minimal degree of organization. Okay, so agote ami koisu je the organization can be very flexible or sometimes with no organization at all. Now like the thing is that the argument to it to hold that a social movement must demonstrate a minimal degree of organization. The organization of a social movement may be very loose or may be very informal or may be very highly institutional. তার মানে হল কি যে তোমার সোশ্যাল মুভমেন্ট এটা অর্গানাইজেশন জিটো ধরিলা তোমার এটা the whole if you see the farmers protest, okay, hey farmers protest, hey farmers movement to guteto eta dhorilo very informal organization asile. Okay, firstly it started with one village, তাৰপিছত আহি পেলাই সিহঁতি বেলেগ আহোঁতে সেই দিল্লী পাওঁতে the villages which were being they touched upon throughout their journey have also tried to give them support, various types of support. So it is a very informal hoy, very loose hoy, no hard and fast rule. Our farmers, even the farmers like protested a movement, the people who were not farmers also, they were also supporting the farmers movement, right? So hey tenekwage the organization of the whole movement can be very loose, very informal or very like or can be sometimes very highly institutionalized also. Highly institutionalized in the sense jeneke dhorila tumi ketiabar Dalit movements or the black black hey white movements clashৰ মাজত যিটো movement আহিছিলে black and white in US and all so হেতু হল তোমাৰ এটা whole institution এটা overthrow কৰিব কাৰণে so sometimes the social movements can also be very highly institutionalized. However, a social movement's commitment to change and organization depends on the participants' aims, beliefs, and intensity of the involvement. The organization of the social movement, যিটো ধৰি লোৱা social movement organizational কথা কলো, which can be very loose and can be informal. So, hey organization too is also based on hey members খিনিৰ perception or beliefs or their aims or their objectives. Okay, the organization of any social movement is based on the people who are associated with that movement. Okay, যোনখিনি মানুহ সেই মুভমেন্টৰ লগত associate হৈ আছে so what are their aims or their beliefs, what are তাহাঁতি কিমান ধৰি লোৱা involved হৈছে, if they are truly very largely involved then the social movement may be very huge in character, right? So hey তেনেকে ধৰি লোৱা কিছুমান social movements এনেকুৱা হ'ব পাৰে that only it attracts only one sum of the society. So তেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ social movements will be very less involved or or sometimes very very loose in character. যেনেকে তোমাৰ mostly the feminist movements, it does not involve a large number of people or it only involves the people who believed in the idea. So এনেকুৱা টাইপত চাব গলে so in this thing if you see in this order so the organization is also important to analyze the nature of the social movement and also the people associated with it are also important and what are the aims and objectives and what are the beliefs of those people is also important to understand the nature of the social movement. Then the next is a social movement can also be identified with the help of different criteria. বেলেগ criteria লৈ পেলাইও আমি এটা social movement এটা identify কৰিব পাৰো. Okay, so for example a social movement can be designated as a radical or reactionary on the base of the change it desires to bring about in the society. So for example ধৰি লোৱা আমি এটা social movement এটা nature টো আমি এইটো ধৰণে ক'ব পাৰো whether it is very radical in nature or it is a reactionary social movement by analyzing the change it desires. Okay, মানে ধৰি লোৱা সেই social movement টো যিটো outcome হয় the outcome of that social movement so what the social movement actually desires. Hey social movement ki desire kore kenuka dhoroner change eta desire kore whether it's a very radical change mane ekdom pura upturning the entire social order or it is a reactionary change je enuka kiba ta beya kaam hoi ase hetu reaction hetur against kiba ta reaction he dise group to so we can also we can also understand a social movement based on what changes it aims. Okay, later on hey change to radical hole gote movement to radical in nature hobo pare or whether if it is only a reactionary social movement then we can understand that in the change that it expects it's not radical, it's just a reaction to something. So on the basis of that also social movements can be identified. Next is the nature of the change which the movement aims to bring about, whether total or partial, is determined by the nature of ideology which it formulates. Next, nature of the social movement to keneke analyze koribo paru if we look at their ideology. Okay, so looking at the ideology also we can analyze and say that A2 movement Marxian movement hoy ba this has got a bit of communist ideology ba liberal hoy or it's a feminist to eneka dhorlua ami ideologies bu jodi we know all the ideologies and we see those ideologies and what সেই ideologiesবোৰ ধৰি লোৱা সেই মুভমেন্টটো social মুভমেন্টটোৱে কেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰকে accept কৰিছে. So looking at that we can also identify the nature of the social movement. Now the last how we can see also the nature is that a social movement has no fixed life. It can be both long and it can be both short. যিটো ধৰি লোৱা social movement এটা কেতিয়াও আমি ক'ব নোৱাৰো যে ইমান বছৰ বা এইটো specific time থাকিব. We cannot fix a time for a social movement to grow or to rise. So sometimes a social movement is very small and sometimes it's very long. Okay, কিছুমান social movement ধৰি লোৱা 10 বছৰো থাকিছে, কিছুমান ধৰি লোৱা 3 মাহ থাকিও শেষ হৈ গৈছে. So it has no fixed life. But based on its duration, later on we can say about the nature of the social movement. If it carries on for a long time, that was a very it had got many issues which were not এনেকুৱা হ'ব পাৰে যে যিমান ধৰি লোৱা long হৈ গৈছে, they are taking much more time to change the entire social order. Jodi horu hoy, that means it was a very reactionary kind of a movement. So enekwa time, so based on its time, based on its duration also one can identify the nature. But one thing which is very important in understanding the nature or how we can identify the nature is that how much people and the way and how the social movement came into life. Hey, jikhini prior to the emergence of the social movement, the time. So one has to understand that the pre-emergence of the social movement as well. Okay, because no social, no change can be targeted without the history of that change. মানুহে যদি কিবা এটা চেঞ্জ ধৰি লোৱা টাৰ্গেট কৰিছে যে এই চেঞ্জটো আমি আনিব লাগে, so কিয় আনিব লাগে, that thing has to be understood properly, that why that change was required. And a social movement, it just doesn't come out all of a sudden. It has the social movement always is born out of a need for change. So why was that need important? Suppose a farmer's laws. Why was the farmer's laws, the change of the farmer's laws was important? Ka Andolan. Hey, Ka Andolan khan kyo amak lagisile? So the prior history of any kind of change needs to be understood, and that also leads to understand how the nature of the social movement can be. Okay, so these are some of the factors through which we can understand how the nature of the social movement can be it can be understood, it can be looked upon. So these were some of the issues. So far basically what we have understood about, we have gone through the meanings, the definitions, then we have gone through the features, then we have gone through the nature of the social movement. So Yapra, hopefully you can answer any kind of question which comes upon, right? So mainly the question that you can focus, a long answer question you can focus from this part is that define social movements and define social movements and describe some of the features that you could define some of the features of the social movements. That's a very direct question which you can expect from this part, and also you can see into that what are the various factors or various elements that one can see in order to understand the nature of the social movements. So you can basically relate into it. And one other thing that I would be giving notes, so can one of you after this class text me on WhatsApp so that I can forward the materials to that person and that person can share it with the whole class. So please do that. Like, I just give my number in the chat box so that one of you can just like WhatsApp me. Okay. Let me just do it like. Okay, so I have given my number in the chat box. So one of you after the class like just text me so that I can give you the notes as well as the expected questions, and I'll give you some materials to study as well. Okay, so don't worry about that. So even if you're not following in the class like and you have some doubts, you can later on also like discuss. So the next part like is that why the significance, like why one has to understand or why one has to study social movements. Okay, hey, social movements too, why one has to understand or one has to study. What is the significance of studying social movement? So studying social movement actually helps the researchers and the academicians. Okay, so any kind of political scientist or any kind of sociologist would have very much interest in studying the social movements. First and foremost, why? কি কারণে very interested হব পাৰে? Because we can understood how the society is being framed right now. The society that we are living in. Okay, this society has been here because of many changes in the past. So in order to understand those changes, we need to also understand the social movements. That is why we need to also study the social movements. Why it is very important to study the social movements and the social changes? Because this will help to make us understand the present phenomena and to understand what we can do later on. যদি পিছতো society এনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ এটা problem আহে, তেতিয়া কেনেকে deal কৰিব লাগিব. If such kind of a problem comes later on in the society, one can know how to deal with it. So basically, in order to understand the social changes, in order to understand the society that we live in, and to protect the society from future troubles, one has to understand and study the social movements. Okay. So next, like, we'll give you some examples, because without understanding of the examples, it's very difficult to like move forward with the theory. So some of the like we are going to discuss a few like social movements. So hey, social movements khini mane ei examples kita discuss kora pisot you would understand like how this thing like social movements how they can have different sorts of characters, different sorts of organization. So Professor M.N. Srinivas, okay, he is one of the finest political scientists who has written like abundance of social movement. So you can even like go through his book as well for further reference. So Professor M.N. Srinivas, when he was writing his book, okay, so in that like he gives a case study of the group Lingayats of Karnataka. Okay, so Lingayats tumar enekwa eta group asle Karnataka which had like, wait just a second. Okay, so Lingayats in Karnataka, they were like why this issue was very important. 1900s, at the beginning of 1900s, they like tried to challenge the whole Brahmanical order in the Karnataka society. Okay, so Lingayat jitu group asle tahati actually 12th century junjon ejon social reformer asile Basava buli Karnatakat. Okay, so he had this Lingayat whole like community tried to follow the ideals of Basava, and Basava was one person who at that point of time, hetu time purana time tumar dhorla kisman he kotha koisile, and like he wrote like such kind of things. which rejected the whole Brahminical notions, যেনেকে temple worship, okay, বা ব্ৰাহ্মণ যিবোৰ rituals হয়, ঠিক আছে, and সেই বস্তুখিনি the whole Brahminical order টোক challenge কৰিছিলে this whole Lingayat মানে community টোৱে, and they wanted a gender free religion and they wanted no discrimination on the basis of religion. So এই যেটো তোমাৰ social movement আছিলে in Karnataka, this was a very old and a very long duration social movement. Okay, so in their case, what was the main the main happening of the entire social movement was that we see that the members of this caste group, a Lingayat caste group টোৱে আৰু এটা caste group এটা challenge কৰিছিলে, right? The Lingayat challenged the Brahmins basically. So one caste group is basically challenging the other caste group, and they wanted a change which is very relevant, but it was difficult to achieve. Okay, India today society just it's always based on caste. Now one caste is challenging the another caste, obviously it was very difficult, and that is why it took a very long term. Okay, so this was one example where the whole objective of the social movement was to bring the social change and the social values as well, and also the social behavior. So that is why it is a very old and a very long duration social movement. Okay, so this was one example. The second is, sorry to me, you could see another similar example of this whole entire, caste being threatening by the caste or, various groups like fighting. So another similar example can be of the Rajbanshis. Okay, so the Rajbanshis in Kuch Bihar and Jalpaiguri districts of West Bengal, they sought to elevate their position to that of Kshatriya caste. যে আমাৰ যে এটা আছে না ব্ৰাহ্মণ, ক্ষত্ৰিয়, শূদ্ৰ, এই যেটো তোমাৰ hierarchy. So the Rajbanshis, they wanted to elevate their positions. Okay, elevate Vaishya pra Kshatriya le যেটো তাহাঁতৰ transformation আছে, so they wanted to elevate their status to the position of the Kshatriyas. Census যেতিয়া 1901 till the 1901 census, the Rajbanshis they were encompassed or they were bracketed with the Kuch tribe. 1901 tomar census or the Rajbanshis were clubbed together. Tahatok ekeloge Kuch community logot ekeloge 1901 census loge rakha hoisile. It was then the movement slowly started. Okay, and it was believed that the Rajbanshis basically through the movement it was believed that the Rajbanshis basically were very different from the Kuch. Okay, then when the movement started, lot of changes could be seen in the Rajbanshi community. For example, tahati ki korile tahator dhorilo kisuman changes anile nijor society. For example, they started using the word Thakur in front of their names. Okay, they started the other thing that they started was that they formed kind of an association, the Kshatriya Sabha. Then they started following the Brahminical kinds of marriage rituals, etc. So Enepapu changes there. What happened was that was led to a positive change, and finally in 1911, 10 বছৰ স্ট্রাগলৰ পিছত the Rajbanshis were elevated to a separate group. Okay, so this was another kind of a example which was there in the Northeast, where we could see that the movement, this whole social movement, also had political character, also had cultural character, and also they wanted to change something in the society. A gote Rajbangshi movement to from 1901 to 1911, where they fought for the elevation of their status and the recognition as a separate group. Etu ami ki buji pao that there were certain political character to the movement. It was also a cultural change and it was also a social change. So this was an example which you can cite as like having a different multi-dimensional nature of the social movement. Then there were also various other movements which we could see in literature or in films. So 1960 literature and films, 1900 and probably late 1950s and beginning of the 1960s, Indian cinema we could see a kind of a movement. Okay, so the movement was new cinema or parallel cinema movement. So etu ami ki dekha pao je the films which came out at that point of time had focused more on dealt with everyday life of the common man. Agote movies boli kole there was only the commercial character of romantic movies. So hey movies khini dhorloa movie mane film or literature and movies we could see this movement. Okay, see these social movements where there were some filmmakers who came together and they started making movies which were dealing with the basic everyday life in contrast in against of what was the romantic movie era. So this movement did not originate from a formal organization. A good movement to cinema movement to it did not come up with any kind of formal organization je ami eta organization khulisu he organization to enekwa kiba kaam koribo, but it was a social movement where people who had the shared belief jibo tumar filmmakers asile, those filmmakers had shared the common belief and they realized that some films which are based on everyday life should be shown to people. So in that sense this social movement which had our origin of origin of the culture and literature was also termed as the social movement. Tarpisot tomalage অলপমান যদি if you see there were kind of very rebellious social movements as well. Jeneke Naxalite movement. The Naxalite movement was very rebellious in nature. Use of violence was there. So till now there were various kinds of movements which you could see as properly social movements. Okay, then you could see political and cultural movements, then you could see violent movements, then you could see all those movements which are properly dedicated to change the society. So enake sale you could see a lot of other instances of social movements with different natures and with different objectives. So on the basis of that we would see what are the basic types of broad categorizations of social movements. So the major categories of the social movements are migratory social movement, expressive social movement, then you have reformatory social movement, utopian social movement, and resistance social movement. So we'll go into this broad categorization of the social movements one by one. Okay, so what is migratory social movement? So it is a type of a social movement in which the participants favor the objectives of the social movement and are keen to achieve them, but they do not find favorable atmosphere in the homeland at that particular point of time and they migrate to some other place. So the word itself, migratory social movements, just try to understand. So it is a type of a social movement in which the participants favor the objectives of a social movement. ঠিক আছে, ধৰি লোৱা তোমাৰ social movement এটা ক'বাত হৈ আছে, the feminist social movement, okay? Or if you could see the, I mean, যেতিয়া আমাৰ ইয়াতে queer movement start হৈছিলে, where the queer community, যেনেকে তোমাৰ gays, lesbians, transgender, এই মানুহখিনিয়ে নিজৰ ধৰি লোৱা ৰাইটছৰ কাৰণে যেতিয়া ফাইট কৰিছিলে, okay? So, the idea of the queer community was very old. ঠিক আছে, একাডেমিয়াত বা social movement হিচাপে it was very old. But ইণ্ডিয়াততো বহুত দেৰিকে আহিছিলে. So, at that point, what happened, যোনখিনি সেই community মানুহখিনি যোনখিনি ইণ্ডিয়াত আছিলে, they would go to Europe or they would go to USA to have pride marches. Okay? So, hey, tenekwa eta idea, eto hol migratory social movement. That people, I am in India, ba mo Ohomot asu, kintu beleg eta kobar jagat dhori social movement eta hoi ase, jitur idea khini, jitur cause to, okay, which is also very important for me. So I can move to that place and join the movement. Okay, যেনেকে feminist movement. Feminist movements খিনি first to Europe start হৈছিলে, then it came to USA. Asia le ahote বহুত দেৰি হৈছিলে. But the people who were actually, involved in they wanted to get involved in the movement, they had migrated to those countries and had given their support. So eto whole migratory social movements. Then you have expressive social movement. It is a type of social movement in which certain sizable number of persons wish to start a social movement, but due to legal restrictions and other problems, they find it difficult to do so and are forced to adjust themselves with the existing situation. Expressive social movement. Tamane whole that suppose, we are like, expressive social movement enekwa hoy je মানে suppose আমি এটা social movement লগত নিজে associate হ'ব বিচাৰিছো, ঠিক আছে, বা আমি এটা নিজৰ ববিয়াকে এটা social movement এটা আৰম্ভ কৰিব বিচাৰিছো, a sizable amount of population. But what happens in most of the countries, even though people want it, they cannot actually go and form the whole movement or cannot start the movement because of many legal restrictions. Because of many legal restrictions and other problems, মানে কেতিয়াবা financial problem হ'ব পাৰে, বা কেতিয়াবা you don't have enough space to organize meetings, etc. There can be a lot of other problems. So in that sense, we can call it an expressive social movement by মানে তোমাৰ যে তুমি express কৰিব বিচাৰিছা, you want to express that you are very, you are not satisfied with the society, or tumi a society to khonot enekwa dhৰণৰ eta change anibo bisarisa, but then you don't have the proper infrastructure, proper means to continue with the social movement. So enekwa dhৰণৰ social movement bor expressive social movements boli koa hoy. We can term it as expressive social movements. Then you have the utopian social movement. Utopia শব্দ to বুজি পাইছাই, right? Utopia means it's like, it's the ideal version, which is actually in the actual world is not very possible to do it. So utopian social movements are those type of social movements in which the objectives of the people who wants to launch the movement is to create an ideal society or an ideal system of social order. Okay, jeneke tomar for example, there are some people, a section of the people who want to have a social movement. তোমালকে আগতে যদি প্লাটো পঢ়িছা, প্লাটো's education system to যদি তোমালকে চাইছা, ঠিক আছে, you say whether it's really possible to have that kind world, contemporary world, but kismat manhe to bisare, right? Some people would expect, or some people want that such kind of an ideal education system should be there in the society, but that's an utopian idea. Hetu ketio possible nohoy, right? But then there will be some people who keep on fighting regarding that, who keep on arguing regarding that. So these are utopian social movements where you want to form a movement where which objective is to have an ideal society or an ideal social system. Then you have the reformatory social movement. So the reformatory social movement it is a type of social movement in which the goal of the movement is not to overhaul completely the existing social system but to reform in some aspects. Okay, so reformatory social movement to এনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ movement হয় which is basically which tries to reform only one part of the social system or he change a small part of the society. Okay, it does not like involve the change of the entire society but a small part of it. কিবা এটা সৰু part এটা society খনৰ বা সৰু change এটা society খনৰ বিচাৰে. So this is a reformatory social movement. Then the next is resistance social movement. So it is a type of social movement in which it aims to change the existing order totally. Reformatory to a slight change asile, resistance social movement is to change the social order completely or change the situation completely. Okay, so total change into whole minor change. So you can just remember it in that way. Okay, so these were the broad categorizations of the social movements. Now, on the basis of the quality of change, hey, পিছৰ যে যিটো চেঞ্জ সিহঁতে ডিটাৰমাইন কৰে মানে ঠিক আছে বা সেই চেঞ্জটো যে বিচাৰে on the basis of the quality of change also Ghaneshyam Shah, he is another person who has another political scientist who has like written a lot about social movements in India. So Ghaneshyam Shah classifies social movements into 4 categories. Okay, চাৰিটা category differentiate কৰে. So first one is revolt, okay, second is rebellion, third is reform and fourth is revolution. So revolt, what is revolt? Revolt is a challenge to political authority aimed at overthrowing the government. So any kind of social movement can be called as a revolt if it challenges a political authority. যিকোনো social movement-ক আমি revolt বুলি term কৰিব পাৰো যদিহে সেই গোটেই social movement-টোৱে সেই political authority-টোক challenge কৰে and it's aimed at overthrowing the government. Okay, and it's aimed at overthrowing the government totally. Okay, so সেইটো এটা revolt বুলি আমি consider কৰিব পাৰো. Then you have rebellion. A rebellion is an attack on existing authority without any intention to seize the state power. Rebellion mane ki hoy? That it is one kind of a movement which aims to attack at the existing authority. Suppose eta thola government or june ase, hey government khanak attack korile, just attack he korile with no intention of actually taking the power. Okay, government khanak overthrow kori pelai nijor power establish korar kono aim na thake, just that it is an attack on the existing authority without any intention of seizing the state power. Okay, then reform. What does reform means? Reform does not challenge the political system, but it attempts to bring about changes in relation between the parts of the system to make it more efficient, more responsive and more workable. So reform mane ki hoy? That it challenges the political system. যিটো ধৰিলা গভৰ্ণমেণ্ট আছে সেই গভৰ্ণমেণ্টৰ ধৰিলা যিটো পলিটিকেল চিষ্টেম আছে ষ্টেটৰ সেই পলিটিকেল চিষ্টেমটোক এইম কৰে সেই পলিটিকেল চিষ্টেমটোক এটেক কৰে এটেক ইন দ্য চেম সেন্স দ্যাট গোটেই চিষ্টেমটো চেঞ্জ কৰিব নালাগে বাট দেয়াৰ আৰ ফিউ স্মল পাৰ্টস ইন দ্যাট চিষ্টেম হুইচ নিডছ দ্য চেঞ্জ অকে কিছুমান সৰু ধৰি লোৱা সেই সিস্টেমটোৰ ভিতৰত কিছুমান সৰু চেঞ্জেস কৰিব লাগে so that society খন ভালকে চলি থাকে so that is reform. Okay, reform does not challenge the political system all totally, but it attempts to bring about some changes between the parts of the system to make it more efficient, more responsible and more workable. Okay, there are some people এতিয়াও যোন মানুহে ধৰি লওক join কৰি আছে, the class is almost about to get over. Please check the timings later on and then join, okay, from the next time. Then the last one is revolution. Okay, in a revolution, a section or sections of the society launch an organized movement to overthrow not only the established government and regime but also the socio-economic structure which sustains it and further replaces the structure by an alternative social order. Okay, so revolution মানে কি হয়? আমি শুনিছো obviously তোমালোকে মার্কসিজম যেতিয়া পঢ়িছা চাগে তোমালোকে রিভলিউশনৰ কথা শুনিছা. So revolution কি হয়? That the social movement basically is very organized. First and foremost, society khone he social movement to ki kore jitu organized government structure hoy tak overthrow kore. It overthrows the government structure and it also like overthrows the socio-economic structure and tries to মানে completely change the society. Okay, যিখিনি আগৰ ধৰি লোৱা structures আছে, political, economic, social structures আছে, এই গোটেই structures খিনি নাইকিয়া কৰি পেলাই নিজৰ এটা different structure এটা establish কৰা. So this is a revolution. So Ghaneshyam Shah basically categorizes these four. Okay, revolt, rebellion, reform, revolution. Saita R, the four R's. Okay, then the last part for today. So one can also last jitu classification hoy, one can also classify the social movements on the basis of the issues which the participant get mobilized on. Mane ধৰি লোৱা আমি classification to আৰু এটা ধৰণে কৰিব পাৰো, that is on the basis of মানে কি social issue to asile jar karone participants pure ei social movement to participate korise. What was on the basis of the social issue on which the participant actually gets মানে participated or they gets mobilized in the whole social movement. For example, there are forest movements, and there are civil rights movements, there are anti-untouchaments, linguistic movements, nationalist movements. So এনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ কিছুমান categorizations আছে which you can categorize it like later on also, মানে on the basis of certain social issues. Okay, on the basis of certain social issues also there are certain social movements which can be categorized on. For example, you have forest movements, you have those like civil rights movements. Hey, janaki civil rights movements, so US when you could see that people were fighting for like the black and whites, black or jikhini rights or karone jetia manhe fight korisile, so all those like rights. Then you have linguistic movements, language or karone jetia fights mane heri hoy movements hoy. Then you have nationalist movements janaki Indian independence struggle, etc. So those are on special kind of issues people get participated. So basically this much for today. So if you have like any questions, you can still ask. Okay. So in the next class we'll try to understand the approaches and like methods to study the social movements, and like there are two relative deprivation theory and resource mobilization theory. So we would continue it in the next class. Okay, so one of you after this class just message me so that I can provide you the notes which you share it with the entire class, and also I'll give you some materials for you to study. Okay.